Last 4 problems on the Module 1 study guide. What's the value of -3 minus -10 minus 8? Okay, we're going to rewrite this. Instead of, well, let's just rewrite that over here. We have -3 minus -10 minus 8. This is subtraction with negatives. We don't like that. It's confusing. So instead of subtracting, we're going to add the opposite. What's the opposite of -10? 10. And here we have -8. Again, we're subtracting. We don't want that, so instead of subtracting, we're going to add, and the opposite of 8 is -8. Once we've rewritten it, it's all addition. That's what we want. Now we combine the negatives, combine the positives. So we have 3 negatives plus 8 negatives. Gives us 11 negatives. Then we have to add the 10. When we're adding, which number is the greater absolute value? Which one's further from 0? The negative. So the answer is negative. Now take their absolute values. You have 11 and 10 and subtract them. So the absolute value of -11 is 11. Absolute value of 10 is 10. 11 minus 10 is 1. So the answer to 18 is -1. 19. Meteorologists recorded temperatures in 4 cities 2 days last year, day 1, day 2, as shown in the table. Which city has the greatest increase? So which one increased the most? So we can look at it as a number line, or find the difference between these two. So for A, we could do -1 minus -5. Instead of subtracting, we're going to add the opposite. -1 plus 5. The 5 is a greater absolute value, so it's positive, and 5 minus 1 is 4. So this had an increase of 4 degrees. We could also look at that on a number line. Here's 0, here's -1, here's -5. How many spaces are between them? -4, -3, -2, -1. They're 4 spaces apart. B. How much does this increase? So that's -8 minus -12. Instead of subtracting, we add the opposite. So -8 plus 12, the positive is greater, has a greater absolute value. So the answer is positive. And take the absolute values and subtract them. 12 minus 8 is 4. So this is an addition of 4 degrees, an increase of 4 degrees. C. Second day, what's the difference? So instead of subtracting, we're going to add the opposite. -2 plus 11. 11 is greater, has a greater absolute value, so it's positive. Now take their absolute values and subtract them. 11 minus 2 is 9. So this is an increase of 9 degrees. And D, it was at 5. It started at -3. Instead of subtracting, we're going to add the opposite. So 5 minus -3, we're going to add the opposite, and that gives us 8. So which city had the greatest increase? A increased by 4, B increased by 4, C increased by 9, and D increased by 8. So C had the greatest increase. Moving on to 20. The value of x minus y is negative, okay? So x minus y gives us a negative. X and y are both positives, so they're both positive. What can you conclude about the values of x and y? Okay, so again, let's assign a number to x. We're going to subtract y, and we need a negative. So if we have 5, and here's 0, let's plug in a number. What's 5 minus 1? That would be 4. That's a positive. We need a negative. What's 5 minus 2? That would be 3. What's 5 minus 3? That would be 2. And 5 minus 4 would be 1. So it can't be any of those. 5 minus 5 would be 0. We don't need that. What's 5 minus 6? 5 minus 6 would be -1. So if we had 5 minus 6, they're both positive. That gives us negative 1. All right. What about 5 minus 7? You go one more, that would be negative 2. Okay, so now we have a pattern here. What do we know about x and y? If they're both positive, y has to be what? What's the relationship between 6 and 5 and 7 and 5? Well, 5 minus 8 would be negative 3. What do all these numbers have in common? Y has to be greater than x. If y is greater than x, you'll get a negative number. All right, 21. Louisa claims that when she subtracts two negative integers, the result is always positive. Is she correct? All right, so she subtracts two negatives. So let's pick some. So if you're subtracting two negatives, let's pick two negative numbers. Negative 1 minus negative 2. Okay? So you have negative 1. We don't subtract. We add the opposite. Negative 1 plus 2. Well, the 2 has a greater absolute value. So the answer is positive, and 2 minus 1 is 1. So, is she correct? No. If the absolute value of the first number is greater oh, this is positive, I'm sorry. Does it always work? No, let's try negative 2 minus negative 1. So negative 2 plus 1 would be negative 1. So if the absolute value of the first number is greater, then the answer is negative.